Righto. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining this WeRobotics webinar series. Great to have everyone. We're looking forward to a lot of interaction. I'm going to welcome everyone by providing a quick overview, introduction, literally just a couple of minutes of WeRobotics in case you're new to this webinar series and WeRobotics, the organization. Then I'm going to hand it off to Peter, who's going to invite our colleagues from Humanitarian OpenStreetMap and OpenAerialMap to give the feature presentation, and then we'll look forward to your questions, comments. Feel free to ask the hard questions. That's what it's all about here, to move the field forward. So on our end at WeRobotics, our core focus is really the use of appropriate robotics solutions to scale the positive impact of a wide range of local humanitarian efforts. And the way we do this is we co-create flying labs. These are robotics labs that are co-created locally with outstanding local partners in order to transfer those appropriate robotics solutions to these partners and provide the professional technical skills that they need in order to leverage these technologies. So we identify the needs, we build the local capacity in order for our local partners to then have the impact that they seek. And then we also incubate local businesses around robotics as a service in order to ensure that our efforts are really sustainable. And we work across aerial, ground-based, and marine robotics. So we're not limited to any one type of robotics. Our interest here is to keep as many options open for our partners around the world. So here, just to give you some examples of the kind of robotic solutions that are out there. And while our main focus still right now is on the aerial robotics, so drones or UAVs, we're starting to do quite a bit of exploration on the marine robotics side. Ground robotics, terrestrial robotics is getting there, but it's lagging a bit behind for various different reasons. Quick couple of words just to wrap this up as an intro. We have secured funding from the Rockefeller Foundation to co-create our first flying labs that we're still actively scoping. The cities here in red are the ones that we've gotten further along with. Kathmandu Flying Labs, our team was there in Nepal for the past couple of weeks doing training on agricultural applications as well as disaster damage assessments. And we will be in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania in October and Lima, Peru in November as part of our Flying Labs efforts there. In closing, WeRobotics is a platform. We're not the robotics industry and we're not the local partners. What we do is we bring together outstanding local partners who have very compelling needs that could be met with robotic solutions, and we connect them with some of the leading robotics companies in the world. In closing, this is the last slide, just to let you know what's coming up in our WeRobotics webinar series next month in October. We'll have an outstanding panel of leading experts who both manufacture and apply marine robotic solutions in a wide range of humanitarian projects around the world. So I hope you'll join us for that. There'll be an email to confirm the date and time. So with that, I'll hand it over to my colleague, Peter, to take it from there. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Patrick. So I'd like to introduce our guests today to the webinar. First, we're going to have Blake, actually, is the president of Humanitarian OpenStreetMap Team's board of directors. He'll give us a quick introduction to Humanitarian OpenStreetMap Team and kind of tell us how the imagery they use works in OpenAerialMap, and then we'll have Nate speak to us about OpenAerialMap. So let me switch over to Blake.
Hi there. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yep, you're loud and clear, Blake. Welcome to the
Okay. Okay, great. Thanks very much, Peter. So my name is Blake Giradot, and I'm from the Humanitarian OpenStreetMap team. And we're also part of the Missing Maps Consortium. So I just want to give you as brief as I can make it. I'll probably go a little bit fast. A brief overview of sort of exactly what we do. You'll see a little bit of the workflow, and hopefully that will give you some context to why we're so involved in the OpenAerialMap project because aerial imagery is kind of at the center of probably 90% of our activities. So just to get started, my organization is primarily responsible for making maps. So we make maps that are intended for humanitarian use, so relief efforts, epidemiological work, health crises, things like that. There's a lot of places in the world where there's just very little map data, and so our organization is dedicated to filling that gap with not only map data, but open map data. And just to give you a sense of what I'm talking about when I say there's very little map data, here's an example. This is a village in Africa. It's Gwekadu, and this was probably the epicenter of the Ebola outbreak in 2014. And this is what the map looked like as that Ebola outbreak started to develop. And you can go to Google Maps right now, and it looks almost exactly this detailed. I think Google Maps has a few more roads than we have here, but essentially this is what we started with. And if you looked at this village on a map, if you were trying to plan relief activities or survey or whatever you were trying to do, you would figure, you know, this is a small village of some sort in West Africa, and there's, you know, a few roads. But if you actually map it, you would find out that it's a city of 250,000 people. And so you can see in the after slide here, this is what our organization does, is we organize volunteers to use aerial imagery to map in building footprints, roads, hydrology, infrastructure, everything we can. And this was actually done, the power of the crowd is, this was actually done in 5 days, and only 244 people contributed to this. And you can see we ended up with a much more detailed map than we had before. So when I say that we primarily do this for humanitarian actors, this just gives you a sense of the people that we typically work with. Various National Red Crosses, World Bank. We're a part of the Digital Humanitarian Network, and that gives us a lot of contacts to other online volunteer organizations like myself, as well as working with various parts of OCHA during their response and preparation. The way that we do what we do is we're typically tracing aerial imagery of some sort. And so a lot of times people are working remotely with imagery and outlining buildings. And then once that part gets done, it all gets turned over to local community members to go through and start filling in the stuff that we obviously can't get from aerial imagery, like road names and neighborhoods and what the buildings are, pharmacies, hospitals, that sort of stuff. So it's almost always a partnership with people on the ground, either responders or with the local community to help make their map better. And just to give you a sense of what we do, you know, we start with aerial imagery that looks like this, and this is actually quite good aerial imagery. I think this is a section of Freetown in Sierra Leone, so this was part of our Ebola response. And then using open source tools, we essentially just digitize everything that we can see in the imagery. And a big part of what we do is building footprints and roads. So this is what we turn over to the crowd, and you can use a web browser, you can use a desktop application, but you can go through and help us digitize this aerial imagery so that it turns into much more usable data instead of just a picture. Once you do all the tracing, you actually end up with a map, vector data. And vector data is what is useful to humanitarian responders. We put everything we do in OpenStreetMap, so all of the data that we generate is publicly licensed, publicly available, and easy for humanitarian actors, you know, civil response groups to get. The governments can make use of it. OpenStreetMap is just an online open database of geodata. As I said, once we actually generate it, we make it very easy for actors on the ground to get this out. They can just specify what sort of data they're interested in, and then we output it in a variety of formats for them. And the reason the digitized data is so much more valuable than just a picture is once we get vector data, now we can start to do all sorts of analysis on it. And this is just a screenshot of various tools. So you can see probably the biggest thing in the upper left-hand corner there is digitized building footprints that's being used for flood scenarios. So they can either be doing planning, what happens when it floods, or if they can actually get the hazard layer that shows where the flood is, they can get real specific data on the number of buildings that are affected, the types of buildings that are affected, how many roads are impacted, and some of these scenario tools will actually start predicting or telling them where they need to send supplies, how many tents, how many gallons of water, how many tons of food, and that sort of stuff. It also gets used for epidemiological work. Once this gets digitized, you can use your phone, you can use a tablet, and you can just tap on a building, and now you can start to collect data about how many people live in the household, when was the last time they got vaccinated, how many people, how many deaths have there been in the household for the past 2 years, that sorts of stuff that's just not possible when all we have is a picture. And that's why getting this vector data or digitizing this imagery is so important. This just gives you a sense of where my organization works primarily. We're generally focused on, what we call the global south or lesser developed countries, emerging economies, however you want to phrase it. But these are the places where map data is usually lacking, it's incomplete, or it's just non-existent. So this just gives you a sense of the areas that we typically work. And, so a lot of us are UAV operators, and so I probably don't have to emphasize this too much, but this is a pretty typical example of what we have to work with. It's satellite imagery, and this satellite imagery is not bad. This is not bad at all. This is a part of Haiti, and we can do a fair amount of digitization work from this, but if you fly a UAV, you can see we end up with much, much better imagery, which makes our mapping much more effective. And that's the reason that we're so involved in OpenAerialMap and why it's such an important project to us. Because the better imagery that we have access to, the faster and the better we can generate the vector data and the maps that people on the ground need. And with that, that's like I said, a really quick overview of what we do, a little bit of our workflow. And with that, I would turn it over to Nate to talk about OpenAerialMap.
Thanks, Blake. Let me switch it over to Nate now.